Alright everyone, this is going to be a rather impromptu deck profile. I wasn't really planning on doing one for Vyrgilla. I've kind of been documenting my journey with this deck on Twitter. I've done pretty well on it recently. I went 3-1 on when I first got a hold of the deck, and then I made some changes. I went 4-0, and then I lent out the deck to my brother to play at a case tournament with some minor changes, and he won the entire thing as well. And some people were asking for it, so I might as well have just done it. So we'll see how this goes. So this is just going to be a deck profile for Vyrgilla for up to set 9, and this is more importantly before the start deck release. So at the time of recording this, it's been delayed until about early to mid-September, but the changes are pretty minuscule in terms of the amount of cards that you swap out, which I'll probably mention later. So we'll just get right into it. So for your ride line, you're just playing the pretty much basic Vyrgilla ride line. 0 can just be anything. The grade 1, it has an effect on Vanguard Circle. It gets an additional 2k power for each of your rear guards. Most of the time that's not that relevant, but you know, it's there. And then when you would ride from ride deck, you can Soul Blast 1 instead of discarding a card, which is great for just saving you extra cards. The grade 2 Vyrgilla has an effect where if you have 4 or more rear guards, then you get to reveal a Vyrgilla grade 3 from the ride deck in order to give itself a crit. It's kind of just like whatever there. You don't really get to use that effect all that often, mainly because you have to commit so many cards just to get to the board, so it's kind of whatever. But it does have a good on-ride skill of when you ride on top, you get to look at top 7 for any grade 2 card. So that includes order units, or orders and units rather. But it's in particular, if you do ride Vyrgilla, you just search your deck. Tutor your deck for anything. It's kind of pretty good. But this is kind of what we've always had for Vyrgilla, so nothing really changed too much about this. If anything, there's only really like one card that does it, which would be the 4 Elf Knights that came out in Festival Booster. So this card is single-handedly the reason why Vyrgilla is now a meta threat and what you should consider for the BCS season moving forward. So it has an effect where from the hand, you get to reveal it if your opponent is a grade 3 or greater, to bind the Vyrgilla, so this Vyrgilla, on the ride deck or on your Vanguard to then ride it, and then you activate all of the following effects. You pretty much search your deck for 2 cards, one of them being a Galaxian and the other being an ultimate skill. You can search your deck or your drop, so that's pretty nifty there. You call the unit and then you add the order to your hand, and then it gets an effect until end of turn. Gets to, when it attacks, you can counterblast 1 to restand your front row, and then gets +1 drive until end of that battle. In addition to that, it also gets your front row an additional 5,000 power for each copy of itself in the soul. So it caps out at 15, because once you're on your 4th one, you would only have 3 if you went through all of them. But this card is pretty insane, because just on the on ride, you get to +2 cards onto the board, and then it enables 5 attacks versus the previous 4, and it's triple drive. So, well, pseudo triple drive. This card just pretty much, it has a lot of power added to the Vyrgilla deck, and surprisingly enough, beforehand it already had like a lot of power in it. It was just kind of missing some sort of extra push with it, and you know, triple drive plus an extra attack will kind of do that alongside the consistency as well with it. So this card is really just absurd, and the fact that it only works when your opponent is grade 3 or greater, it makes this deck kind of want to go second. You still can go first, but for the most part, you don't really care too much about whether or not you go first or second. It's ideal if you go second, but you know, it doesn't really matter all that much, but you'll take it. So continuing on with other grade 3s, an additional 3 copies of Persona Red. So What this original Vyrgilla actually does is that it can Energy Blast 3 to choose one of your opponent's rear guards and bind it, and then you call specifically a grade 2 from your drop back to the board. And then it has an on attack skill where you can counter blast 1 to restand a grade 2. The fact that this is an axe skill alongside with Elf Knights being an axe skill means that you can use this effect first to bind something, call something back, and then use Elf Knight skill to bind this and then ride it again. So because Elf Knight also doesn't have Persona Ride, well, it technically does, but you're never proccing it by riding Elf Knights on top of Elf Knights because you're going to re-ride the original Vyrgilla back anyway. Playing multiple copies of Persona Ride allows for your pushes with Elf Knights to be even greater with that. You could conceivably cut this down to 2, but for the most part, you kind of would like to max out on this just to enable the absurd push powers of this deck. So that's pretty much for that. And then the final grade 2, or rather grade 3 before we move on to grade 2, is 2 Fanvares. So Fanvare is a Galaxian, so it is a target for the Elf Knights. It has a skill that on play, you can Soul Blast 1 to choose one of your Ezreal, which is this grade 2 right here, one of the main focal points of this deck. It gives it in itself 5,000 power. But if your opponent is on grade 3 or greater, it gives them each 10k instead. So pretty much this card enables your multi-attack to be even greater, because then usually you'll want this card alongside an Ezreal, both of them up, and then they'll both swing for swing, and then you have your Elf Knights, which will then restand them, which is, you know, it's on its own 23, Ezreal being 25. They hit over the offensive, so that's really nice on that. In addition to that, if you played an ultimate skill, if it's in the front row, you get to move it into the soul to countercharge 1 and then draw a card. So pretty much the ultimate skill that we currently have is the Stardust Blade, which costs counterblast. And so the play pattern with it is that when you ride into Elf Knights, you get to search out the Galaxian and the ultimate skill. So typically you can search out the Fanvare itself alongside the ultimate skill, which will then fulfill the condition for Fanvare. Very solid deck, or solid card rather, but because it is a grade 3, you don't really want to play too much of it, because you're already playing an additional 7 with Elf Knights and the Persona Rides alongside ultimate skill. So only 2 is fine. It can get a little bit awkward with one of them do get into the damage zone. Plus, in addition to that, this card's the only real Soul Blast in the deck. So once you use its skill to move itself into the soul to, you know, countercharge and draw, the only way you can really get it out is if you had another Fanvare. But once you have one, and once you see both of them, you can kind of start looping it. This one's in soul, you just call out this one, which will Soul Blast them out, and then this one will go back into soul, and then because this other Fanvare is now in the drop, you can conceivably get that back with the Elf Knights. So it's kind of nice like that, but playing more than that is kind of a bit excessive in my book. Next, the main focal point of this deck is the 4 Ezreal. Ezreal, for all intents and purposes, is just a vanilla. However, because you're playing Vyrgilla, it is a 15 base power and 15 base shield. This card, it's surprisingly it's not strong per se, in the sense that it's not a flashy card, but it is a very solid card in that it plays really well on defense, and it being 15 base means that it lines up super well with a lot of your grade 1s as well as power gains as well. This is pretty much your main attacker. It's also a Galaxian, so you can definitely search that out. So there's not much else to really say about that. It's just kind of one of your big beaters. Now, because Vyrgilla is going to be kind of foreseen in the meta a lot, and you know, if you do play the mirror match, your grade 3 Vyrgilla does bind. So in order to circumvent that, I am choosing to play 3 Variance Ray Dragon. So Variance Ray Dragon doesn't have any effects on the rearguard circle. It does have an effect on the drop and in the hand. Well, not the hand, but it's essentially if you're on grade 3 Vyrgilla, it's a 10k shield. So this is a very tanky deck. You pretty much have 15k shield here and then 10k shield here alongside, all the other types of shield that you have, whether that just be triggers or, just defensive cards that you're going to search out like your orders. So it's very tanky, deceptively tanky at that. And if it's in the drop zone, so after you guard with it, you get to bind it if you're on grade 3 or greater Vyrgilla to target an Ezawar, and it gives it until your opponent's end next turn 5,000 power, 5,000 shield, and it can't be chosen. So against Bob, that doesn't do anything, because if it's in the front row, Bob is still going to retire it. However, against Vyrgilla, they can't target it now, and now this is a 20 base, 20 shield. 20 shield is kind of a premium at that. So, and, if you're given the 5,000 power, you're a restanding multi-attacking deck. So that also comes in clutch as well. Before, I played it at 2, but then because I expected more people to be playing Vyrgilla, I bumped it up to 3, and it turned out there was a world where it did help my brother win, because he did say that just binding it and just giving your Ezawar additional power was just enough as well, just to push for the kill. Because this is what kind of the deck does. Like, it's randomly defensive with the few cards it does have, but on the crackback, it can look for the kill because it can easily do 5 attacks and swinging for massive numbers. So the last grade 2 that I'm playing at the moment is just one of the Dragon Empire Ace unit. This card will get cut later once we get the start deck. But for the moment, because the only card that we're playing and that Energy Blast is the grade 3 Vyrgilla, you kind of want like another card that goes alongside it, because then you're not really using your energy much for anything else. You're not really doing it for the Energy Blast 7. So at least with this card, it can help get rid of opposing Ezawars. It can get rid of your opponent's one Varlord, because now that the ban list is out. But most of the time, you're not really using it as like an attacker, except maybe in like the early game. Because once you get your Elf Knights rolling, you pretty much are already set in what you're calling, with that being Ezawar and also Fanvar as well. So this card, it doesn't really help too much, but like I said, for the moment, it's a serviceable card and it will get cut later. So that's it for the grade 2 units. Now moving on to grade 1 units. So because Elf Knights is the heart and soul of the deck, the sole reason why this deck is tier 1, that's why we're playing 4 Drag Ritter Nidlum. So pretty much on play, Counterblast 1 to look at the top 7 cards of your deck, and you add a grade 3 or greater card. So in this one, the priorities are pretty much just you want to find your Elf Knights. If you don't see Elf Knights, you're not really playing. I mean, yeah, regular Vyrgilla is kind of suitable, but your push turn is a lot worse. In addition to that, you can also search out Persona Rides, which, it helps set up if you already have the Elf Knights. You can set up for next turn where you can Persona Ride, draw a card, get the front row 10k, and then use the Elf Knights as well. And then I guess in some cases, if you find the Fanvar, sure, you'll do that. But for the most part, you don't. But if you do whiff, you get to countercharge 1, which is sick. In addition to that, it also has a continuous skill. If your opponent's rear guard is retired or bound this turn, it pretty much gets a continuous 5k. So this works really well with the grade 3 Vyrgilla because it does mine. So this card is often a 13k. So in a pinch, it can be a 13k attacker to hit Vanguard, but most of the time it is a 13k booster, which pairs very well with the Ezawar because 13 plus 15 is 28, that hits over a trigger. So and then you add on the Fanvar power, then you add on Persona Rides, and then you add on Elf Knight's power. You can kind of see how ridiculous the power gains in this deck are. So before that, this deck, because it kind of wants to go second, or you kind of have to take advantage of the early game. So something with that is just for Shenri. So Shenri, it just cycles cards. It's really good in the early game. You get to proc it a lot too in this deck in particular because you keep looping your ultimate skill. So this card can pretty much always be live throughout the game. The only downside is that because this deck doesn't really use soul, it going to soul is kind of like negligible, I guess. But you know, you kind of want to push your opponent to high damage so that way you can finish them off with your high power restanding like units. So that's all that Shenri's kind of here for, to be honest. It's just here for early game. It's just a generic card that you could want to play. Now, like I said earlier, Off Nights is your main game plan. So because of that, I'm playing the 1 Summit Flare. So if you can play this card as long as you don't have a G-Zone, which we're obviously not. The main effect of it is that if it's in your hand, you get to discard it, and then you put 2 cards that were from your ride deck back into your ride deck face up. So pretty much any of your 0s, 1, 2, and then I guess your original grade 3 Vyrgilla as well. You put them back into the ride deck, and then you look at your top 7, I believe, to search for a grade 3 with a different name, which, you know, because you're going to be on this Vyrgilla, it's going to be searching for your Off Nights. And if you whiff, it just gets back into your hand. So, because I guess it's the only other way to use soul, quote unquote, but for the most part, it's kind of just a failsafe in the sense that, like, if you really need to see Off Nights, then this is like 2 shots at it after, I guess, turn 4, I suppose. It also has an additional effect where if your opponent has 4 or more cards in the drop, it gets 5,000 shield. And then if they have a G-Zone, you get to bind, or I believe return the grade 3 from your ride deck back to it to get an additional 10k shield. That doesn't really come up too much because not a lot of people are playing Stride decks now. But for the most part, it's another 10k shield. And, you know, we have the variants raid that are 10k shields. We have the Ezawars that are 15k shield. It's just a lot of extra shield in this deck for no apparent reason. And then finally, the last main deck units are 4 Perfect Guards. So opting out of the Elementaria, because when you ride up from 2 to 3, you're able to search your deck for any grade 2 cards. That includes Blitz orders. So more often than not, when you're playing your game, you're always going to really have your Blitz order, unless you're kind of hellbent and you need to search for something like an Ezawar. So because of that confliction, and you know, there's not a lot of guard restrict that's warranted at the moment, nor decks that have triple drive, it's fine to play the 4 copies of that. In addition, 1 extra normal unit, it also buffs up your Vanguard with the Stardust Blade, which we'll explain later. So going into the orders, so conveniently, Twin Cast is a grade 2. This is usually what I would be searching out because it is double shield, 10k shield, and then 15 shield on once again. So alongside Ezawar, that is a lot of free shield that you just randomly get just for playing the game. So this is pretty much my main search target and Regalis piece of choice. You don't really need Fire Regalis in my opinion because Off Nights already searches your deck for it. And then you also have Stardust Blade, which also looks at the top 5 to search it. You already have a lot of search power in this deck anyway. You kind of just want to live in order to kill your opponent on your like hard push turn. But to go alongside that, if you've already seen it, or for whatever reason you draw into like OT, or you want to, you know, you have an Ezawar and you want to like protect it, I'm also playing the Fencing Roar. The Fencing Roar is a really strong card. There's a reason why this card got limited on the ban list. Just being able to bounce something like your Ezawar, even though you can, you know, technically revive it back, it acts like a trigger. You're usually bouncing back a trigger. The, you know, synergy, I guess, of guarding with your over trigger and then bouncing it back is still disgusting. That's just essentially a perfect guard. It's pretty insane. These are pretty much the 2 grade 2s that you're mainly searching because everything else you're probably going to go through your deck already. This deck has pretty high velocity. And then the last card that we'll be playing are the ultimate skills, which are the 2 Stardust Blade, because it's the only one we have access to at the moment. Also grade 2, so I guess you could look to search this out if maybe you're going first and you want to, you know, search your deck even more. But it pretty much has a skill for Counterboss 1. You look at the top 5 cards of your deck and you get to call a card from it. Gives your opponent, or it gives your Vanguard then the red text that it gets an additional 3k power for each of your normal units. So your rear guards are already buffed a lot with Persona Ride, Off Knights, Fanfare Power, and Variance Ray. Like, your rear guards are already fine. The only issue is that your Vanguard's small, except for this card. It helps make it in like absurd numbers. So like even in like a okay scenario, it makes your Vanguard like easily 40k on like the first time you use it. And it's pretty absurd because then it now makes your Vanguard a threat. It doesn't have crit, but it has triple drive. And because you're searching your deck out of the Galaxians, of the ultimate skills, you're thinning your deck out. It also has like a random like skill where like if your rear guard's retired during your turn, I guess, you get to call out another one. I don't think I've ever proc that. I don't know, it's too gimmicky. But for the most part, you only really need the 2. If you really wanted to be greedy, you would play it down to 1 because you always can search it out off night. I would not recommend it because if it goes to damage zone, you're kind of out of luck. Turns off your Fanfare as well. So just playing the minimum 2 in case 1 goes to damage zone. So that's it for the main deck. Now moving on to triggers. Playing 8 crit, 3 effect fronts, drag Veda as the over trigger of choice, and then 4 heals. So this is a Dragon Empire deck. You're gonna abuse drag Veda as you can. You can't really abuse it too well, just because the effect to restand your front row and to get the drive is all just once per turn. So at least they solved that, but drag Veda is still, you know, strong as it is. Just 2 more drive checks like that. It is quite absurd. Vyrgilla is a top deck. I wouldn't be surprised if this card gets banned. 4 heals, pretty self-explanatory. 3 front. You can, I guess, opt to play draws if you really want to see your pieces, but fronts are a more defensive choice as well as an offensive choice, in the sense that, you know, you're really just wanting to kill your opponent as soon as you can. You don't really want to go to the late game. You can, because, you know, you have all the shield that you would want to try to mitigate against whatever it is your opponent is doing. But for the most part, you don't really need to see the pieces that much unless you're that worried about it. So just opting for 3 effect fronts, and you don't need soul either, so just extra shield. You can just play 8 vanilla crits. I just play the effect crits because I had it, and I guess you could also boost up your Fanfare to make it plus 2k. It's 15, and it makes for a magic number against your opponent, I suppose, if you're going first, but that's very marginal, I suppose. But that's pretty much it for this deck in terms of its card choices. When we do get the start deck, you don't really swap out that much, to be honest. The only cards that you're really swapping in is you're taking out 1 of your Stardust Blade for the other ultimate skill that you're getting. You would be taking out, I suppose, 1 Shenri and then 1 Variance Ray for the new Flare Cosmore. We're not playing the current Cosmore because while it is a restanding booster, it doesn't really benefit anything else besides the Ezor. So until we get Flare Cosmore, Shenri's just kind of better in that regard. And then also just taking out the Ace unit for the N-Wing because that's just additional buy. So really, we're playing this deck at about, I would say, close to full power. It's just mainly 4 cards later, and it doesn't really change too much for that. Now, in terms of what this deck does, it's pretty linear in the sense that, let's say you're on grade 3, you just activate its effect to find an opponent's card, and then call back an Ezor. Then if you have the Off Knight, or if you don't, you can just call out your Nilhrim. For example, you can call it out here, search your deck out for the, or try to dig rather for the Off Knights, use the Off Knights effect to bind this to then go to the Off Knights. Off Knights would then get you the Vanguard as well as the ultimate skill, and then you would just then play your ultimate skill and then just play off of that. So at baseline, this is kind of just like what your board would be. You would Soul Boss 1, give both itself and the Ezra 10k because you went second, or because you only can do this if your opponent's on 3 or greater. So this is 23, this is 25, and then to buff up your Vanguard, you just play the ultimate skill, search for anything out. You can choose to call out whatever. Ideally, you would want like another booster, so I guess you could call out like a Shenri, like here, because your Vanguard's already going to be big. You'll swing, active, swing with Vanguard, and then you just restand. And you kind of just rinse and repeat that over and over again. It's pretty simple, it's pretty linear, but it's really effective. So yeah, that's about it. I don't know what else to say, to be honest. I guess just, if you want to see me talk about this deck more, just follow me on Twitter on like DZ Scholar, I suppose. I don't know. We'll see what happens.